Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to go over a few high stakes sessions that I played last week, but first, let me show you guys something I got in the mail that I think you might find interesting. Right, so this here is a silver play button from YouTube, something they send you when your channel crosses 100,000 subscribers. So obviously when I started the channel, I never expected to get something like this. And of course I have all you guys to thank. So seriously, thank you all so much for being a part of this group. And if you're new here, welcome. I make videos about poker and traveling and stuff. Glad to have you on board. But anyway, I wanted to give this a quick shout out before moving on with today's events. And today's events are, well, let me put this down first. It's a little bit heavier than it looks. Today's events are two sessions that I played on Live at the Bike last week. The first one was 2550 with the occasional $100 straddle. The second day was a proper 5100 with a $100 big blind ante. So quite the sizable games for myself. And unlike many recent streams, I actually picked up a lot of hands and I ended up in quite a few interesting situations. So I think you guys are gonna enjoy these hands, at least I did. Before we jump into those, however, I wanted to remind you all that I will be in Vegas November 4th through 7th. And on November 6th, I believe that's the correct date, which is Sunday, I'm gonna be playing poker all day at a location that I'm not yet sure about. But if you guys are interested in knowing and also just a more general day-to-day update into what I'm doing, go ahead and follow me on Instagram. The link is below in the description box. I'm gonna be posting where I'm playing in Vegas on my Instagram story. So go ahead and shoot me a message or just follow me and I'll let you guys know. But anyway, that's enough talking. Let's get this party started with 2550 no limit. All right, guys, here we go again, this time starting with some 2550 no limit. We're gonna have to go a bit faster than usual today, just because there's a ton of hands and I don't want this video to be like an hour long. So here we go. I sit down with $50,000 and in the first interesting hand, there's an open from middle position to 175. Then actions on me on the button with Jack 8 suited. Typically against raise already, I think this hand is totally fine to just be folded, but sometimes raising with it I think is also okay, and that's what I decided to do this time. He calls and we go heads up to a flop of King Queen 8, 2 spades, 1 club. So we've got bottom pair, backdoor flush draw, and also just a board that generally is going to be good for me. So I continue with the small bet and he makes the call. Turn card is the ace of spades, and all things considered, I think it's a good card to continue bluffing on, mostly because after he calls the flop, he's going to have hands that are going to be better than just an 8, for example, any king or even a queen, and just a lot of hands that are going to hate to continue on this particular turn card. Plus, if he had a flush draw, I suspect he would check raise some of the time at least, so I continue with a half pot sized bet, and it gets the job done against King Jack, so off to a decent start. In the next one, we get into a very similar situation. The $100 straddle is on this time. There's a raise to 300 for middle position. And yours truly is looking down once again at Jack 8 suited. Same strategy as last time. I'm going to be folding most of the time, but this time I do raise it up. And he makes the call. So we're going to go heads up to a flop, which comes king high with no spade. Not really a board I want to get too crazy on, but still we're going to be able to win against a lot of better hands like ace highs, queen highs, and even small pairs across continued aggression. So I do continue with a small bet. My opponent makes the call. Turn card's not great. It's the 4 of spades. Usually a card that's going to be a bit better for him, I think, but I decide to not give up, keep the pedal to the metal by betting $2,000. And luckily, we get a fold against pocket 7s. So 2 small pots, but it's always nice to get the confidence going with hands like these. In the next one, things are going to be a lot spicier than just a random Jack 8 suited. Here we go. There's a raise to $150 from early position. The button, Dr. H, re-raises, and then when it gets to me in the big blind, I look down at pocket aces. Not only is it uncommon to look down at pocket aces, but it's even more rare when there's a raise and a re-raise already ahead. So a dream situation. Obviously I'm going to be raising myself just like if I had any sort of bluff. Initial raiser folds, but Dr. H, who was in the cutoff, not the button, excuse me, he makes the call in position. So we're going to go heads up to a flop, which comes down king 7-5. Pretty good flop for me. I'm going to have a ton of strong hands, and there's not much to be worried about aside from maybe pocket kings, but that seems really unlikely. So anyway, I see no reason to stop betting. I throw in $1,200 and my opponent calls. Turn card is overkill. It's the ace of diamonds. Even though it's pretty cool to have top set, especially with aces, in this situation I wasn't too happy with it because if he has a hand like king queen suited, king jack suited, really any king, or even like a non-believing pocket jacks, pocket tens type of hand, now he's going to be off the hook. As for what I want to do, I think you can go either way here between continuing to bet or just checking. Be pretty tough to be bluffing, I think. Maybe hands like Jack 10 suited or Queen Jack would continue, but I would often just fold those hands pre-flop versus an open and a re-raise. So after thinking all this over, I decided to check it and potentially let him bluff, which I think I've seen him do a few times after floating flops. If he's got a hand like 6-8 suited, for example, or even just any random 7, he might decide to turn it into a bluff, putting me on a hand like queens perhaps. But he doesn't take the bait. Dr. H is a very wise player. We're off to a river, which is the 4 of diamonds. Now, I think once again you can make a case for checking or betting with my exact hand. Considering that I have hardly any bluffs, I decide to bet, but very small, right around a quarter the size of the pot. Perhaps to even induce a raise, making it look like a blocker bet with a not so good hand. But Dr. H quickly lets it go, so we don't get a ton of value, but always nice to win one with aces. Moving right along to yet another battle with Dr. H. In this one, the $100 straddle is on. He limps in from early position, and I look down at a suited jack on the button. Granted, it is jack deuce, so the worst possible suited jack, but suited nonetheless. I decide to isolate here, raise it up to $400, and only Dr. H calls. We go heads up to a flop of 9-4-3 with 1 spade. I have mixed feelings about this particular board, but as you guys can probably guess, I'm going to bet small. That's what I do, and he decides to check raise. Interesting choice. I think if he had a really strong hand, he wouldn't do this. So with some backdoor potentials and just some evil plans of stealing it later on, I decide to call in position. And what do you know? We get one of the best turn cards in the deck. It's the 6 of spades, giving me a straight draw, but even more importantly, a very disguised flush draw. Not surprisingly, Dr. H continues betting, but his sizing here doesn't really look like a bluff. It's less than half pot, $1,100. I think you can go either way here between just raising it up, trying to steal it right away, and applying more pressure on the river if he calls, or just calling this bet and trying to realize some equity, perhaps improve on the river, or who knows. Different things can happen on the river, right? So that's what I decided to do, getting such a good price. Don't want to get 3-bet on the turn and blown off all these nice cards I can catch on the river. And we do get one of those. It's the 9 of spades. So we end up making a flush. And not only that, but it pairs the top card, which I think he could have as played. So if he's got trips and I've got a flush, seems like a great situation. But sadly, he decides to check it. I don't really think he'd do this if he had a 9. Perhaps he might do this if he has a full house. So if we get check raised here, it's going to be kind of nasty. But we're going to have to cross that bridge when it comes to it. In terms of my sizing, I think I would only really have very good hands or just bluffs. So I decide to bet pretty big here, $6,000. As you guys can see, Dr. H has jack high, so he's not going to put in another penny. But we're winning another pot and things are going rather well so far. Moving right along, in this one, Casper opens early position to 150. I'm in the big blind with 7-6 offsuit. Considering there's a big blind ante, pretty standard defend, I think. So I toss in the money, and we get another decent flop. It's 9-5-3 with 2 hearts. So we've got a 2-way straight draw. Any 4 or 8 would give us a straight. And not only that, but I think we could represent some heart runouts since I've got the 7 of hearts. So when I check and he continues with a bet of $250, I decide to check raise right away to 1,000. Could be doing this with all sorts of strong hands as well as draws. Casper is undeterred though as he continues with a call. Turn card is not great. It's another 5 pairing the middle card. Now it's a lot tougher for me to represent strong hands, and I would really never check raise the flop with any 5 in my hand unless it was a set of 5s or 2 pair. So I decide to check it here and Casper checks it back. River brings some help. It's a 6, so we improve to a pair. You know, it's hard to make a pair in this game, so with some showdown value, but not really strong enough to bet for value, I decide to check it again. He checks it back, and we end up winning against pocket deuces. Moving on, in this one, I'm in the straddle for $100, and action gets to Dr. H on the button, who min raises to 200. Joe calls in the small blind, Eddie calls in the big blind, and then it's on me with ace-9 offsuit. Not exactly the best hand ever, but after Dr. H opens for such a small size on the button and both of the blinds call, it doesn't feel like anyone's too strong, so I'm incentivized to raise it up and try to take down this dead money. Plus, I've got an ace, which is typically a good card to have if you're going to attempt something like this, so I do kick it up to 1300. Dr. H calls on the button, but both of the blinds fold. We're going to a flop, just the two of us yet again, which is pretty decent. It's king 7-3 with 2 spades. There's a king out there which I could represent, and not just that, but the fact that there are 2 spades could be beneficial since I've got the 9 of spades. I'd rather have the ace of spades, of course, but what am I going to do, right? I continue with a 1/3 pot size bet, 1,000 into 3,000, and after a few seconds, Dr. H decides to let his pocket sixes go. Can't blame him, pretty tough hand to play in position even after a re-raise pre-flop with a king out there. But no complaints for me, obviously. We take down another one and move on to a much more interesting hand where I've got Jack 10 suited. In this one, Dr. H opens to 175 and then Eddie re-raises to 550. I'm on the button with Jack 10 suited, like I said. And I think you could make a case for all 3 options here, actually. But as you guys may or may not know, I've been experimenting with some cold calling in position. Usually it's going to be okay as long as you do it with hands like aces and kings once in a while too, so it doesn't get too predictable. But anyway, without getting too nerdy, I do decide to cold call, and when it gets back to Dr. H, he calls as well. So we're going to go 3 ways to a flop in position, which is just amazing. Jack 10-3 rainbow. No diamond out there, but who cares? We've got top 2 pair. And after Dr. H checks and Eddie continues with a bet of $750, I think we might be up against an overpair, which is always a great situation. I see no sense in raising, at least not yet, so I make the call. Dr. H folds. Turn card isn't the best card ever, it's the 8 of clubs. Queen 9 does make a straight, but given the pre-flop action, I don't really think he's going to have that too often. A slight issue is that he might think I could have hands like Queen 9 suited or 9-7 suited. Realistically, I don't think I would, but you could see how this card might cause some concern for Eddie and perhaps slow things down if he does have an overpair. But apparently he doesn't care about this card whatsoever because he does bet yet again, $1,500. After he bets a turn card that's just a little bit dangerous, and I could still have hands like jacks and tens very easily after the pre-flop action, I start to get the feeling that he might be bluffing, perhaps with hands like ace-king, ace-queen, king-queen even. So, yet again, even though we've got a really strong hand, I think there's more value in just calling, looking for a clean river card, potentially letting him bluff once again. I think about it for a few seconds and call, but we get a pretty bad river card. It's the 8 of hearts. So now my hand is counterfeit and we do lose to any overpair since he would have, for example, aces and 8s or kings and 8s, and I have jacks and 10s. So while I'm sitting there in agony about this river card, Eddie just continues betting with no concern whatsoever, and pretty sizable as well. $3,300. Relative to the size of the pot, it's not very big, only around half pot, but given how the game had been playing so far, there had not been a lot of bets over $3,000. Action's on me now, and even though I did get counterfeit, like I said on the turn, I had a pretty decent feeling that he might be bluffing, and I've got one of the best bluff catchers I would ever have, so I do eventually call. And after I call, we hear some very nice words from Eddie as he says, "You got it." I turn it over, and we're going to win this almost $13,000 pot. A little bit surprising to see that he had pocket 9s, but obviously no complaints whatsoever. We're going to take this one down, and that was the last interesting hand I played for this session. Ended up winning around $14,000 on this day, so very good result for a 25-50 game. And with that, we move to the following session, which was a 50-100 game with a $100 big blind ante. Once again, I sit with $50,000, and we're going to start things off with ace-jack offsuit. There's a raise from early position to 300. These cards don't really want to call, better to just raise or let them go. I do decide to raise this time, make it $1,000, and only the initial raiser calls. So we're going to go heads up to a flop of 7-6-5, 2 spades. not ideal for me. And even if I had over pairs, I'd probably check this particular flop back. So that's what I do. And we see the 9 of clubs on the turn. Definitely not improving anything, since now any 8 also makes a straight. But when he bets $800, so a few things going through my mind, mainly that it's a pretty small bet for starters. So if I call, I don't have to be right too often. And secondly, there's a lot of hands we're beating that he might be stabbing on this board with. For example, any sort of Queen 10 suited, Jack 10 suited, King Jack, for example. Maybe even other aces like Ace 10 suited. So yeah, obviously the counter argument to that is that we lose to a ton of hands, but I do decide to float once more. Having the Ace of Clubs could represent some backdoor flushes, and like I said, don't have to be right very often against this price. River is interesting. It's the Ace of Spades, so potential front door flush comes in, but we do improve to top pair. So if he was betting a hand like any random pair, we're obviously beating that now, unless he rivered aces up. But when he checks it over to me, I think it's very likely we've got the best hand. However, not really sure what worse hands are going to call if I do decide to value bet. I feel like this particular opponent might recognize that I'm not going to be too strong after the hands played out this way. And he could check raise me with all sorts of stuff and put me in a miserable situation. So I decide to play it a little bit conservatively and just check it back. And we do end up beating another ace, a smaller ace in fact. So kind of sucks that we didn't get value against that hand, but I am happy that I called correctly on the turn, I guess. Anyway, moving right along to this next one where I've got Ace 9 of Hearts. I raise it up to $300 and only Boston Jimmy calls on the button. So we're going to go heads up out of position to a flop of Jack 9-3, 1 heart. I think it's okay to check middle pair, especially on boards like this, so that's what I do. Jimmy disagrees and bets $400. I, of course, make the call. And we get some help on the turn as the 5 of hearts appears, giving me a rather disguised nut flush draw. I check it over to him again, but he checks it back. And what do you know? We make the nuts out of nowhere on the river when the 8 of hearts appears. Now it's on me, and of course I've got the nut flush, so betting seems logical, but when you really think about it, almost all of my hands would be checking on this river card. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to lead out, I think, so I decide to check it once again, and luckily Boston Jimmy bets. Now, he's got middle pair, so I'm not entirely sure if he's going for some thin value, rather disrespectful value, I should say, or if this is just a bluff, but either way, since I've got the best possible hand on this board, I'm obviously going to raise it up. After I do, though, Jimmy lets his second pair go, obviously not surprising, but we're starting things off once again on the right foot. So things have been going pretty smoothly, as you guys can tell. In this hand, it's nothing like that. There's a race to $300 from early position. I'm in late position with pocket tens. Once again, I kick it up to $1,000 against that same opponent from the first hand, and he makes the call. So round 2 here, going to a flop heads up, which is once again in my favor. King, Queen 10. We fought bottom set on a board where I think he's going to connect fairly often. As you guys can see, he connected a lot better than I initially thought. He's got the nuts, ace jack. Of course, I have no way of knowing this, so when he checks, I bet small and get punished right away as he makes it $2,600. Given the pre-flop action, I think it's almost impossible for him to have a set of kings or a set of queens. So I suspect this is either some crazy draw like a straight draw and a flush draw, or just a hand like ace jack or jack 9 that flops the nuts and is trying to get all the money in. Of course, if the board ends up pairing, I can win a big pot, so being in position, I'm not going anywhere just yet. And it goes from bad to worse on the turn as the 3 of clubs appears. So like I said, now we're losing to even more stuff. If he was check raising with any sort of flush draw on the flop, we're now losing to that as well. But when he bets a little over half pot, once again, I think it's totally reasonable for me to call. Hope that the board pairs and try to win a big pot. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. It's the 8 of hearts. Same river as last hand, but this time it's not as helpful. And even worse news is that my opponent now shoves for $7,000. Nasty situation for me now. His bet is so small compared to the total pot size, so I don't have to be right very often. But then again, what exactly are we beating that plays this way? And I think the answer is only some random type of bluffs, which I'm not totally discounting, especially after I've beat this player in a few small pots already. You know, guys tend to do that sometimes where they just take a stand with some random hand. For example, you could have a hand like ace queen with the ace of clubs, Jack 10 with the Jack of clubs seems very speculative of me, especially once I've got a set of 10s. Not a ton of bluffs that I can think of, but at the same time, I've got a very strong hand, and it's a really good price. So like I always say, don't have to be right too often when you're facing a small bet size. However, after a few painful minutes, I really can't imagine many ways that I'm winning this one. So I decided to make a rather tight fold, at least tight for me. And luckily, as I saw later on, and as you guys can see here, it was the correct fold as my friend here flopped the nuts on King Queen 10. So nice hand, and we're going to lose a big one here. A few rounds later, I look down at 4-3 suited from early position. Obviously a hand you could just pitch back to the dealer, but this table had been playing fairly tight, and I haven't been playing a lot of hands, so I think I've got a good image. So I kick it up to $300 here and get 2 callers. Jimmy on the button and Jew in the big blind. Flop comes down 9-8-3 with 1 heart. We've got bottom pair and some backdoor possibilities, so when it gets to me, I bet $300. Only Jimmy calls on the button, and we go heads up to a turn card, which is the 5 of spades. 6-7 now improves to a straight, but aside from that, it shouldn't really change anything. I'm not really sure if we can continue getting value from worse, but at the same time, we've got a pair, which is good enough to win at showdown sometimes. For those reasons, I check it over to him, but he disagrees with all that and puts in $1,100. As mentioned, we've got a pair, so I think we could still be winning often enough to call here, and there's a lot of available draws, such as Jack 10, 10-7 suited, random gut shots, the occasional Jack 7 perhaps. So I decided to get a little bit curious and make the call. River is a total brick, the king of diamonds. Check it over to him once again, nothing else to do. But Jimmy, once again, does not like the checking idea. Instead, he throws out $2,100, a little over half the size of the pot. And now it's on me with bottom pair. Interesting situation for sure. I would hate to call and get owned by a random 8 or perhaps a 9. But I've played with Jimmy enough to know that he's probably going to check those hands back. So really, I think his bet represents a pretty strong hand or just a misdraw. And like I mentioned on the turn, there are plenty of those available. So once again, against a small size, don't have to be right too often. I toss in the call. And sure enough, we win against Jack 7 suited. So nice to hold up with bottom pair. He had a lot of outs. This one's going our way. A few minutes later, we all decide to do a round of $200 straddles. And this hand comes up where I look down at pocket 9s in middle position. I kick it up to 600, and only Matt Berkey calls on the button, who I'm sure most of you are familiar with. Anyway, we go heads up to a very nice flop. Ace 9-6 with 2 spades. So we've got middle set on a board where I would often be bluffing with all sorts of stuff. For that reason, I decide to continue betting. And of course, Matt Berkey makes the call as he's got top pair. Turn card is even better. It's the king of hearts, so this shouldn't change anything. And not only that, but I would typically continue blasting with all sorts of hands here, like Jack 10 of spades, Queen 10 of spades, any sort of flush draw really, and even hands like Jack 10 of diamonds, Queen Jack of diamonds, 7-8s, all the 8-7 suiteds, even 7-5 suited occasionally. So yeah, you guys get the idea. With so many bad hands available for myself, I will obviously be betting the good ones too. I think an overbet is best in this case, so I put in $3,200. Once again, Matt Berkey is not convinced, and he makes a call. And we get another great card on the river. It's the 3 of diamonds. Shouldn't really change anything. At this point, he's got around $11,000 or $12,000 behind, so pretty much a pot-sized shove. That's what I do. All in. Matt Berkey does not snap call. He does not love the situation whatsoever. But after a few minutes of weighing his options and explaining that all draws missed, he's most likely going to call. That is exactly what he does. And we end up winning a very nice pot against Mr. Berkey. Nice to get lucky in this one, and things are going in the right direction once again. Next, there's a raise from David to $300. Then another David calls next to act, and I look down at ace 5 suited in the big blind. Good candidate to squeeze with, although calling seems totally standard as well. I choose the aggressive route this time, making it $1,800, and only the initial raiser, the first David, I should say, makes the call. So we're going to go heads up to a flop out of position, which is Queen 10-4, 2 hearts. Not great for my exact hand, but I would have a lot of strong hands that connect with this board after raising pre-flop. For example, ace king, pocket aces, pocket kings, ace queen, king queen. You guys get the idea. All hands I would continue betting, and of course any flush draw. So I do put in a bet of $1,300. David makes a call with his pocket 9s, and we get a nice turn card, the king of diamonds. So now a lot of my bluffs improve. My opponent's only got around a pot-sized bet left behind, I think $6,900 according to the graphic, and I think you guys know where this is going. Now, of course, you could make the case that my hand is not really strong enough and we could have some better bluff candidates, but I don't really think so. I think betting ace-5 suited all in here on this turn card makes a ton of sense. Obviously, I'd rather do it with the heart variation, but clubs are fine too. I stick it all in there, and we don't get snap called, which is always nice. I got to give him credit, though. He did think about it for quite a long time, which with a hand like pocket nines seems rather absurd, but maybe I gave off some sort of tell or something. However, he does end up eventually folding, and we take this one down. In this next one, there's another $200 straddle on. Middle position raises to $500, and I'm looking down in late position at 10-9 of spades. I think you can go either way between calling or raising, but this time I decide to just call. Yeah, that's right. You guys didn't expect that, huh? Anyway, David calls in the big blind, so three of us are going to a flop, which is just ridiculous. 7, 6, 5 with 2 spades. I mean, yeah, I've got just 10 high, but come on. Straight draw, flush draw, straight flush draw, all sorts of stuff going on. Action checks all the way to me. I decide to just start putting money in now. And then David in the big blind agrees with my idea, but decides I'm not doing it right. Instead, he kicks it up to 1,800. Obviously, I've got the most ridiculous hand and all sorts of draws, so of course I'm going to call in position. Don't really see any value in raising yet again. But I wish I had, because the turn is the miraculous 8 of spades, giving me a straight flush. Not something you say every day. Probably not something you say every year, in fact. But this is my second one this year, I believe. First one was on Hustler Casino Live a few months ago. Fun fact. Go check out that vlog. It was a good one. But anyway, he decides to continue betting, $2,300, music to my ears, of course. Now I'm thinking, what hands is he check raising on the flop with? And that's a complicated question against this particular opponent, because this guy likes to gamble. He's action. He could have anything, but he could also just have hands that actually did improve, like anything containing a 9, maybe even a 4, and of course, all sorts of flushes like ace, king, queen, or jack high flushes. All those hands are hands that I'd like to get some value from. Of course, you could make the case that just calling is better, because if he's bluffing, we're going to get some more money on the river. But considering that we're the two biggest stacks at the table, I decide to just target the hands that are actually good and are going to be able to play a big pot. So I raise it up right away. Unfortunately, that's not one of the hands he has. As you guys can see, he's got jack deuce of clubs. So credit to him. Quite a lot of heart trying it with that hand. And of course, we don't get any more value, but still pretty sweet to have a straight flush in a 5,100 game. In the next interesting hand, I raise it up to 300 with 9-8 suited. Matt Berkey calls, and then Boston Jimmy squeezes from the small blind to 1,500. Action's back on me, and I'll be the first to say, with a hand like 9-8 suited, it's not really the best idea to call re-raises, because if it comes like Queen Jack 10, you flop a straight, but then you get wrecked by ace king, you know? So I'd rather pick like smaller suited connectors, stuff like that, or pocket pairs. But I decided this time to give Boston Jimmy some action and just cross my fingers that I don't flop the bottom straight, which of course I don't. It's king 9-3 with 2 hearts. I've got middle pair, so when he continues with a bet of $1,800, it's not exactly a fist pump situation, but flopping a pair is hard, and he could be bluffing with hands like any flush draw, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10 suited. You get the idea. So I do decide to call once, see what happens on the turn, which is a total blank. The 5 of clubs. Would have been nice if the 3 was a club on the flop instead of a diamond, since now we turn some back doors. But of course, it's not the case. I've just got a measly pair of 9s. Not feeling great about it, and even less so when Jimmy continues for a bet of $3,700. Now, it's a little bit interesting that he's actually doing this with pocket queens, because I could definitely have hands like king jack suited, king 10 suited, maybe even ace king offsuit once in a blue moon. But anyway, that's not what I have this time. Instead, it's, like I said, just a mediocre pair of 9s. So I do eventually just let it go. This one's going to Jimmy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last interesting hand of the night, where I look down at pocket kings first to act, raise it up to $300. Now the player on my immediate left, Ishan, aka Brown Balla, apparently, he raises it up to $1,100. Now, action's back on me, and considering that I opened first to act, I think this is a really strong hand that he's got. And not only that, but he's been playing very tight all day, so I think it's actually best to just call, because if I were to put in another raise, and he decides to continue, I'm not feeling too great about it. I know it sounds ridiculous with pocket kings, but it's a very situational stuff going on here. So eventually I decide to just call. We go heads up to a flop of 7-4-3 rainbow. Check it over to him and he checks it back. Now the turn is the 5 of clubs. So any 6 makes a straight. And I think with all my hands that want to put in a bet here, I'd want to go pretty big, mainly because this board favors me a lot more than him. So after some thought, I decide to bet 150% the size of the pot, $3,600. Brown baller makes the call. This is looking very good. I suspect he checked back a hand on the flop like queens, jacks, perhaps pocket 9s or pocket 10s. Of course, he could also have aces, but if he does, so be it. God bless him. Anyway, the river is the 10 of spades. Now we lose to pocket 10s as well, but we're still beating all those other hands like pocket pairs that, are smaller than kings. So I decide to bet the size of the pot. Would also be doing this with some bluffs, so totally fine to bet the size, I think. He calls right away, and what do you know? We chop against the other variation of pocket kings. A little bit anticlimactic to end up chopping this one. Would have been pretty sweet if he had a hand like queens or jacks. Also would have been a lot of pain if he had aces, which I suspect he would have played in a very similar fashion. But anyway, this was the last fun hand of my night. Ended up winning a decent amount, and as always, I hope you guys enjoyed the hands. So as you guys saw, poker went pretty well for me over those 2 days. I ended up winning just shy of $50,000 across, I think, a total of like 10 or 11 hours played. So obviously a fantastic result. What I was more happy with though was how I played actually. And that's not something I hardly ever say. In fact, it feels like most recent streams, I really haven't been playing super well. At least that's how I feel. Obviously, there are other factors involved, such as variance or, running bad, being card dead, whatever. But outside of those things, I feel like I haven't been playing to the best of my abilities when the cameras and lights are on. And that could be for, a bunch of different reasons. But I'm trying to just try to play as well as I can on these streams and ignore everything else. And I'm happy to say that over these last 2 sessions on Live at the Bike, I did feel that way. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the hands. And yeah, this vlog in particular is a good result and a happy ending. So as always, thank you guys for watching. Maybe I'll see you guys in Vegas next week across those dates that I mentioned. If not, there's always next time. And yeah, that's all I got for today. As always, thanks for the support. Seriously, thanks for that silver play button. I mean, how cool is that? I never expected to get something like that. So got to figure out where I'm going to hang it. But anyway, that's it for today. As always, thanks for watching. Good luck at the tables. See you guys next time.